This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
This is Pro Wrestling Illustrated Podcast. I'm your host, PWI's Senior Writer, Al Castle, wishing you a very happy New Year. Got a lot to cover here in the first episode of 2022. Frankly, I hope to keep this short. One of the big things I wanted to do, and we do plan to get to, is to at least quickly go over the top 10 of the second annual, PWI Tag Team 50. Time flies. And we will do that. That issue is still available. And before it's off the shelves, did want to quickly, with my co-host Brian Solomon, who's going to join me in just a moment, talk at least about the top 10 tag teams of 2021 and maybe an overview of tag team wrestling here starting in 2022. And then also we wanted to cover some current events, and unfortunately there's no shortage of them, so we will try to get through it quickly. But new champions in WWE, in NXT, in New Japan, we'll talk about all of them. And then something else that we've been sitting on for quite a while, maybe at the end of the day it's been too long, and that is audio from Righteous Reg's Hotseat interview with then WWE champion Biggie. One of the news items we'll be talking about is, of course, him losing the title. But nevertheless, a fantastic interview. You could read it inside the pages of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, but you could also listen to it here in this podcast. Again, obviously, he was still champion at the time, and a terrific interview that Reg put together. I know Reg is a big fan of Biggie, and Biggie's a fan of Reg, so it worked out that we were able to put it together. I wanted to bring it to you here. So stay tuned, and a lot more to get to here in the first PWA podcast of 2022. And let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated before it's off the shelves, because very quickly our Year in Wrestling issue is going to be coming out. But you can still pick up the February 2022 issue, which does feature Big E on the cover. As I mentioned, we've got our hot seat interview with Biggie. We've got the tag team 50 list ranking the top 50 tag teams in all of wrestling in here, and so much more. Go to pwi-online.com and pick it up. Subscribe, as I mentioned, the Year in Wrestling with all the achievement awards, Wrestler of the Year, Match of the Year, Tag Team of the Year. And let me tell you, I've got a sneak preview of it, and it's going to be very, very newsworthy. You don't want to miss this one, and that is not hyperbole. So absolutely go to pwi-online.com and subscribe. You'll be sure to get it before anyone else, especially if you get a digital edition. Comes right to your inbox right away. It's the way to go. And either way, whether you go print or digital, you get a big, big discount off of the cover price. If you missed anybody over the holidays, that wrestling fan in your life, it's a fantastic gift. I'm sure they'll be happy to get it, whether it's late or not. Again, pwi-online.com. Brian Solomon, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Al. Hope everything's well with you.
Yes, absolutely, and with you as well. This is a quicker turnaround than usual for us, but so much has happened just over the last week with three pretty major title changes on three big shows and lots of other news. So we're going to talk about that first, and then we'll shift to a discussion about the second annual PWI Tag Team 50. Let's start with probably the biggest news over the weekend, and that's everything that happened on day one, the pay-per-view, and day one of the year. We talked about in the last episode how WWE was taking all these precautions to protect that card and that main event from this latest COVID outbreak. And at the end of the day, obviously it was enough. That's not at all putting anything on them. I mean, it's just the reality of what the country is dealing with. I don't want to call it a worst case scenario, but they lost their top star, Roman Reigns, and had to pivot, kind of think quick. And, in wrestling, there's this kind of old adage that when you do lose your main event or you lose a top star, you try to replace it with something even bigger. In this case, it was putting Brock Lesnar in the Fatal 4-Way, making it a Fatal 5-Way. for WWE Championship and having him win the WWE Championship. So clearly a pretty drastic change of direction. I don't think this is where they would have been going otherwise, and all kinds of ramifications, obviously, for the months ahead and for WrestleMania. But what do you think of this picture of them taking this direction, and where do you see it going?
Well, first of all, the first thing I thought of with Roman Reigns being out was that I was worried about him because, we all know that he's a little more compromised than most with his health situations. And it's a shame because he was one of the most kind of hesitant talent to begin with. We're hesitant to come back, hesitant to work, in an environment with the potential of COVID. And so it's unfortunate that he eventually wound up getting it. But that said, I mean, it's interesting to me. I'm wondering, I guess we have no way of totally knowing, but I'm wondering how much plans were changed. Like, I'm wondering if he would have gotten the Universal title if Roman Reigns was there, or if the decision to make him a champion was as a way to sort of make it up to the fans. Although, I mean, if you're going to make something up to the fans, I don't know if beating Biggie is the way to do it. I think there were a lot of deflated fans, not necessarily because Brock got the belt back, although there was some of that, but because, Biggie has a strong following. And so I'm wondering where it's all going. If Biggie hopefully will still be in the mix somehow, or I'm hoping he doesn't wind up kind of getting demoted, that this is just seen as an experiment. I'm hoping this is a permanent thing for him because I think he belongs at that top level. And I'm also wondering if now they're gearing up for a champion versus champion thing with Roman Reigns when he does come back, maybe even a unification. I mean, that's what I would want to do in terms of where the creative would go with that. But I guess it sort of remains to be seen.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I guess we can't really know is, I think it's probably and we can't know this for sure, but it's probably a fair bet that the plan was not to take the title off of Roman Reigns just because they've been pushing so long, that he's been a champion for so long. And if and when they do it, you think it'd make more sense to do it at WrestleMania. So maybe in this way, it's a blessing in disguise that they clearly that's the plan for WrestleMania, some other iteration of Brock and Roman Reigns. This way, that match is a little bit fresher than if we had it in whatever it was, November or October at Crown Jewel, again in January, and again at WrestleMania. So maybe that works out. But what we can't know was whether that title was coming off of Big E anyway. With now Bobby Lashley being put in that position to work against Brock Lesnar, I wonder if the plan was to put it back on Bobby Lashley. We can't know. You touched on it. I'd like to explore a little bit further. There are people who, understandably so, are very upset about Big E losing the title, losing it the way he did to Brock Lesnar. I mean, Brock could have pinned anybody else in that match and won the title, and you would have protected Big E a little bit, especially coming off a couple years ago. Some people still have that bad taste in their mouth with what happened to Kofi Kingston, also at the hands of Brock Lesnar. But at the end of the day, he had whatever it was, a 5-month title reign, respectable. I don't know if this is the end. I don't know if they get that title back on Big E and just kind of return to what the course was for WrestleMania, which for him seems to be Goldberg. I mean, that's certainly the match that he's talking about wanting. So putting aside Brock Lesnar getting that title, what do you think about Big E losing the title and the way he lost it?
Well, I want to point out that, not to correct you, but just because it makes a big difference to me, that it wasn't even 4 months. So it was like 3 months right? And change. Yeah, because he won it in late September or mid-September. And I feel like the plug should not have been pulled on him in that way. I mean, the other side of it is this, and this is my own personal preference. I hate when they do these matches where a guy can win a title by pinning somebody else, in these 4 ways and things. I understand why they do it. It's to protect people. It's to it's the same reason why they have cage matches where you could have somebody lose or have a title change or whatever without someone having to be pinned necessarily and protect them. I get it, but I feel like it's kind of a cop-out when they do that. And to me, if they were going to put the belt on Lesnar, the only way to do it is to have him beat Biggie in that match. That's my own preference. But having said that, I wouldn't have done it at all. I wouldn't have had him win it at all. I just think he needed more time. He needed more confidence from them. He needed more of a push. The Kofi situation, because people compare it to that because they're both in New Day and all that. But I feel the situation with Kofi, that his title reign, it wasn't quite working out. Fans were rejecting him. He wasn't working and as a champion. Big E, I feel, was working, and I feel like any shortcomings that he had was in the way they were booking him, having him lose when he shouldn't lose, being put in situations that he shouldn't have been put in, that were not his fault. But I feel like fans were responding to him. There was a lot of support. What happened with Kofi was there was a lot of support in the beginning, and then it dried up, and then people just didn't seem to want it. They rejected it. That isn't what's been happening with Big E, and I feel like they should have given him more of a chance here. I think he got caught in the crossfire of this Roman Reigns situation. I'm hoping that it turns out to be a bump in the road, like I said, and he's back in the title picture. Maybe he'll get it back very soon. I don't know. Maybe this is part of a bigger picture. I mean, we all hate when people say, let it play out and see what happens, because half the time there is no long-term plan. But I feel like this was a bad decision. It really was a bad decision. I feel like this was an opportunity. Instead of saying, oh, we're going to put it on Brock and give the people a big title change, this was an opportunity to finally strengthen Big E, who has been booked not in the strongest way as champion, and have him come out of this match dominantly as still the WWE champion. That, to me, would have been the way to go especially if you're looking to do something fresh and different. I mean, for God's sake, why not Roman Reigns and Big E at WrestleMania? I mean, I feel like that's a match that has potential. You can build towards a match like that. Even if you say, well, Big E's not quite ready for that, you can make him ready for that. Instead, they chose to do the same old thing. I love Brock Lesnar. I think he's a great attraction. I think he's still something very special and needs to be treated with care. He probably shouldn't have even put in this match to begin with, but I think that this was not the right move to do at all.
Yeah, that's the thing. You put Brock in the match, he almost has to win, right? Because he is this indestructible force, and I think that works. I mean, I think by and large that's the way you book him. That said, you could also put him in this match and not have him lose, right? So neither win nor lose, but just somebody else gets pinned. I understand. Especially because, the word was that they really wanted to build day one to something special, one of the tent poles of the WWE calendar every year, that they felt the need to do something extra special. But yeah, that said, I really like Biggie. I think he brings a lot to the table. I went to Buffalo Wild Wings the other day, and they've got all the sports channels up, and there's Biggie on ESPN or something being interviewed, and he's got this crossover appeal that I don't think they've had in a while in a lot of their champions. That said, you've got to be realistic that he wasn't moving the needle. And he certainly isn't the draw that Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns are. So I could see them, whether it's temporary or not, thinking, look, we now have Roman Reigns as the world champion on one of our brands, and we've got Brock Lesnar as world champion on another brand. Those are the two top stars in WWE, for better or for worse. Brock Lesnar only being a part-timer. But I get the inclination to doing that. And as you touched on, I don't know if it's where it's going, but I'm at least very curious about the idea of unifying the titles. I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think it would make the world title a lot more special if there was only one of them. I guess you'd have to deal with the issue of having two touring brands and what you headline shows on one of those brands if you only have one world champion. But I don't know. Like so many things with WWE, I guess we have to see this play out and see where it goes. You're taking Bobby Lashley challenging Lesnar. I mean, that it has the feel of a big match, something we haven't seen before, something that, you know, just as a marquee match, two big, giant, powerful, you know, former MMA fighters doing battle in the ring, that absolutely has some marquee value. That any chance they put that title on Bobby Lashley then?
I do love the match. I think it's a great marquee matchup. Like you said, it's got built-in appeal. You know, it does some of the work for you. It's a match that a lot of people wanted to see. It's a logical match. You know, in a perfect world, I would say that, I mean, it would make sense to me to have somebody different in there, especially when you're leading to WrestleMania, rather than Lesnar and Reigns again. So that might be something in Lashley's favor, where they could say, okay, well, at least that'll give us a different WrestleMania matchup. But I just don't know if I think they're kind of locked in on that Lesnar Reigns thing again. But I do think that if you do it as a title unification, not saying they will, but if you do, that at least adds some more juice to the match, makes it something different. So that might be the way to go, where people go, okay, yes, we've seen this before. We've seen it at WrestleMania before, but now, you know, it's for everything. Now it's for all the marbles. This is bigger than the other matches they've had. So I think that's probably, well, I don't want to say probably, but I mean, that would be a logical place to take it. I also feel like if you do have one world champion, which I think is a good idea, especially now at a time when they're in some heated competition, and I do believe in that kind of like all hands on deck kind of scenario. They've already established that in the past that the unified world champion can sort of float between the two brands. And I almost feel like the thing with Lesnar being this free agent, quote unquote, is almost like a tease for that, where the idea being that whoever holds that one belt is going to be able to go to whatever brand that he wants, which makes sense. And as far as having the two touring brands, I mean, look, it's been done before. You know, I mean, even back in the 80s, when you did only have one world champion and you had multiple touring shows, I think they might have even had 3 touring shows. I mean, you have the talent. Your main event, it just isn't a world title match. You know, your main event is whatever the other like hottest feud is, you know, like whether it be you know, whatever your hottest match would be other than the title match. I mean, that's kind of how they used to do it, and it would seem to make sense to do it that way again.
Yeah, I mean, the last house show I went to, the Christmas weekend show at the Garden, which lost, and I guess both house shows that weekend lost their world title match because of these COVID concerns. They headlined with Edge and Kevin Owens in a cage, and that was absolutely a worthy main event. You know, I think most people would agree. So yeah, you're right. I mean, that this wouldn't be a new problem or anything like that. That said, they also have 2 nights of WrestleMania this year. So again, you could come up with an attraction, I guess, to headline one night that doesn't have a world title on the line, or you could headline one of the nights as they did last year with a women's world title. But I don't know. That feels a little bit outside of WWE's comfort zone. One other possible upside to this is that potentially where this could lead is to Biggie winning the world title, recapturing the world title at WrestleMania. That would be a really cool moment for him. So, you know, maybe that appeases the Biggie fans. But it's kind of hard to tell between now and then what the path is for him. Again, like I said, he wants to work with Goldberg. I don't know if that's the best idea, or if they do that in Saudi Arabia or something.
Yeah,
but
I think Biggie is.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe Lashley actually wins the title at the Royal Rumble, and the direction you go at WrestleMania is Lashley versus Biggie for the world title, with Biggie winning it back.
I think Biggie is the only person that wants to see Biggie versus Goldberg.
Yeah,
I have to
and
say.
I get it. I mean, this is one of the people he watched growing up, one of his idols, and the chance to share a ring with one of your idols is cool. And I think it's an attraction, but maybe not necessarily for the WrestleMania stage. So Saudi Arabia loves Goldberg. I'm sure it's not long before they're back over there. That's a match you could do over there. So yeah. Speaking of 2 nights of big shows, as WrestleMania is doing this year, New Japan's been doing it for a couple years now, and just had their Wrestle Kingdom event over the last couple nights. And I think this year is technically a 3rd night coming up, with kind of a co-branded show with New Japan versus Noah. But for all intents and purposes, the main event of Wrestle Kingdom night 1 was Okada taking on Shingo Takagi and winning back the IWGP World title. We won't talk a lot about the show, but I do want to talk about just the decision to put that title back on Okada. I'm all for it. I think he is a generational talent. I know the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is supposed to be announcing its new class any day now, and the expectation is that he might have one of the widest margins of being voted in of any first ballot candidate. And for good reason. I mean, I think you're sick of the Mount Rushmore analogies, but I think he is on that Mount Rushmore of Japanese wrestlers. And maybe when his career is all said and done, he might be at the very top, or at least close to it. And for the last couple of years, they've kind of pulled back, and I think there's different reasons. Some of them probably were necessity. I think Okada might have been feeling some of the grind of that pace that he had of just putting out, 5-star matches of the year every time he went out there for a number of years. But it has been a couple of years since he wore that title, I believe. And in the meantime, they did Ibushi, they did Ospreay, they did Shingo, they did Naito, and all worthy top guys in New Japan. But Okada really is, I think, on a different level. And it reminds me of, whether it was Bruno Sammartino in the 70s or Hulk Hogan in the 80s or John Cena in the 2010s. When you've got that guy and he's that good and he's that over and he's that much of a difference maker, you ride it out, right? I mean, I don't see any reason. And I think you establish guys and you groom guys along the way, but I don't see any reason to shift off them. So I think it makes all the sense to have that title back on Okada. New Japan kind of had a down year in 2021. I'm interested to see whether Okada can kind of change their fortunes in 2022.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you said, he's been, whether pushed that way or not, he's been perceived as their top guy for many, many years now. It's kind of a situation like we sometimes see happening here, where even though somebody may not be positioned that way any longer on television, on the shows, as the top person, still in the minds of fans, in the minds of the public, they are. And so that's kind of been the situation. And honestly, with New Japan and their history, that was the situation with Antonio Inoki for years and years, where it didn't matter how old he was getting. Not saying that Okada is at that age level, but it didn't matter how long he'd been around. It didn't matter if he kind of stepped into the background and was allowing, new stars to kind of take the spotlight. He was still perceived as the guy in New Japan. And that was partly because he owned the company. But I mean, once you're at that level, especially I find this to be the case very often in Japanese wrestling, you stay at that level. Fans hold you in that high regard. And so it's somebody that you can always go back to. And it seems like they've gone back to him, which would seem to be the way to go. I mean, why, if that's what fans want, if that's what the perception is, then kind of why not go with it? It's sort of like what was happening. I mean, it didn't last forever, but what was happening with Hulk Hogan for years, where they kept trying to, and it happened with Sammartino too. They kept trying to find somebody new and put it on somebody new, but then they'd bring him back because in the end, it was never quite the same. And they knew that that's what people wanted. Eventually it runs its course. But like I said, I feel like the track record in Puroresu, whether it's New Japan, All Japan, is that there's more of a longer attention span. So I think he's probably going to be in that top spot, whether officially or unofficially, for as long as he wants to be.
Yeah, yeah. And another one that comes to mind is with Cena. I think they were kind of moving him out a little bit earlier than they needed to, and putting Roman Reigns in that position before he was ready. And even now that Reigns has had a number of years as the top guy, has not reached, objectively speaking, it just has not reached the numbers, the metrics that John Cena did. But you touched on it. Guess how old Okada is?
Oh boy, you're putting me on the spot. I don't know. 35.
He's 34.
Okay,
it's amazing that he's had the run that he has, and he's not 35 yet. I mean, he's still he's just now entering his mid 30s. So yeah, I mean, here's a guy who you get another 10 plus years out of. It's amazing. What if anything do you see as his? And there's no reason to think that this is even in the cards. But is there a future for him in the United States? How much does the appeal cross over? We saw, Nakamura was almost that level, another top guy in Japan for a number of years. Granted, he was already a little older when WWE signed him, but I think there was all kinds of high hopes, and in some ways even higher hopes, because he ticks some of those boxes that Okada didn't in terms of a more classic American appeal, including having a little more of a grasp of the English language. This is all to say, could Okada get over in the U.S.? And I guess it's a different question whether you're talking WWE and AEW too.
Yeah, I'd be very hesitant, especially after seeing what happened with Nakamura. I mean, what happened with him is just a classic example of how the talent from Japan gets mishandled, and they don't really know what to do with them. I mean, they made him into a caricature. They made him, it's almost impossible to believe that it's the same person, even though a lot of his persona and character is similar. But the presentation, everything about his position on the card, I mean, it's hard to explain to maybe somebody that just started watching wrestling yesterday. There was a point where Nakamura was considered possibly the best in the world, and that is, I don't think anybody would say that now. I mean, and it's all because of how he's been handled. And I would hate to see something like that happen to Okada, although, like you said, it might be a different story if he went to AEW. I don't know. But I have to say, even going to AEW, based on their own track record, I don't think it goes as badly as Nakamura in WWE, but I do think it is still a step down. And I don't know why he does it, obviously, except if it's money. Although recently I was reading something where he was kind of talking about how he'd love to work with CM Punk and Bryan Danielson, which indicates to me where his attentions might be aiming when it comes to the United States. But I feel like with AEW, they'd give him better matches than he would get in WWE. They'd give him that push for a while. But then I think he'd kind of get lost in the shuffle. I don't think it would be a long-term deal. So maybe if he comes in, gets his dream matches, pops his numbers and things, and then kind of goes back, that might be the way to go to him. But a long-term American run, I just can't see happening.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a very good possibility that we see just that in 2022. I mean, they've had this kind of talent exchange program, AEW and New Japan, and I'm sure that's on their wish list. And you think of, Okada came up with a couple of them, Danielson and Punk, but a bunch of others. I mean, the next Omega match, imagine that happening on an AEW card. So yeah, I could see that, and I think that could absolutely work. Kind of the occasional appearance. But I agree. I don't know that WWE would know what to do with Okada, nor would they. Part of me thinks somebody there would have to say, look, if there's a chance of getting this guy, we have to get him. But I don't know that they'd know what to do with him. And this is probably a good transition to the next thing I want to talk about. But remember, Nakamura, when he was in NXT,
did carry over a lot of that mystique and that appeal. I remember going to a couple of NXT shows when he was there and was working at the champion, and he absolutely had that rock star special feeling. And I think it even carried over to the very beginning of his WWE run. That entrance, that music, I mean, he just kind of had an appeal. Some of it falls on him too, right? I mean, he didn't exactly set the world on fire in the ring. Remember, they gave him AJ Styles at WrestleMania some years back, and people,
I think that was a turning point for him.
Yeah, people's mouths were watering over the prospect of that match, and it was okay. And they had a couple other matches, and they were okay too. But he never had that breakout performance. He's also a little older when he came over from WWE. But there's definitely, whether it's fair or not, there's a thought that he's kind of been okay coasting in WWE, living in Florida, surfing, making, some good money, and maybe not have to beat himself up like he did for years and years in Japan. So on the topic of NXT, that's the other title I wanted to touch on, a big title change last night with Braun Breaker winning the NXT title from Tommaso Ciampa. We've talked a lot about NXT 2.0. Again, I don't think it's a very good show. I think it's unwatchable most weeks. But, and I think a lot of people agree, the exception being Braun Breaker, who has been a standout, breakout, a star of NXT 2.0. And in as much as, this is Vince McMahon's NXT, and he's got his he's more hands-on with it, and the idea is to groom stars that he sees as a good fit for WWE's main roster. I think it makes all the sense in the world to put the title on Braun Breaker. I mean, I don't know why have that championship on somebody who sort of personifies the NXT that they were trying to move away from. And I feel like almost objectively, and Braun Breaker, I'm sure, will probably agree, Tommaso Ciampa is the more skilled, more experienced a wrestler, and we saw him at his best just be, one of the highlights of I think of that heel run with Johnny Gargano when they were headlining some shows, and him coming to the ring with no music and just being as despicable a heel as there's been in the last decade. So we know Tommaso Ciampa is great, but we also know that, Vince McMahon's not terribly interested. So they turn the page, and now Braun Breaker is the champion. Do you think this is the right move, and where do you think they go from here?
Yeah, definitely the right move. Not only is it the right move, I think they should have done it the first time they wrestled. Yeah. I didn't see the point in beating Braun Breaker like that. He's not the kind of a talent that I think you do that with. And he's the kind that, not to say that he's a Goldberg, but I mean, like, he's that type of a deal where you want to keep him as strong as possible. And one of his greatest strengths is, kind of having him run over people. So beating him too often, I think, is something that hurts him. I think he is the kind of a performer that this new NXT was made for. In fact, I'll go even so far as to say I think even in the old NXT, I think he would have done well and he would have gotten over. He's just natural, as we've seen. Like these matches we're seeing him in NXT are the first matches that he's ever had in front of live audiences.
Crazy.
Which is incredible. And, I cannot stand the rhetoric that people get into of, well, he hasn't paid his dues and he hasn't been around long enough. And how could you put a title on somebody that blah, 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 blah. There is so much precedent for that. You could point to a million examples. Lex Luger was one, Goldberg, like we said.
Kurt Angle.
Right, yeah. Kurt Angle. People that come out of the box and are so super hot and you want to run with it. This idea of dues is nonsense. You do what works. You do what the people want. You do what's going to draw well and what's going to spark interest. You protect people's weaknesses. You highlight their strengths. That's what you do. And so that's the move with this guy. There would be no point in just having him mix it up on the mid card until he's quote unquote ready, because I feel like you dilute him by doing that and you weaken him. And that's been done to so many people. because I think of this mentality that I think even extends to some veterans of the business of just like, well, this guy's not ready yet, and he's got to do this, and he's got to pay his dues and do that. This was the moment to do it. He is main roster bound. There's no question about it. And this NXT run is going to do what it was meant to do, which is to prepare him for that. So let him run roughshod. Let him do what he's capable of doing. And when the time is right, you bring him up and you let him loose.
The issue there is, and this is one of the problems with them kind of moving away from that old guard, is who does he work with, right? I mean, there's talent there, and there's very good wrestlers there, but it's not the NXT of even 6 months ago or a year ago, where, you know, in some ways Tommaso Ciampa's the perfect opponent for him, but maybe you get another match or two out of the two of them. But outside of that, when you look at the new class of NXT wrestlers, there's not a lot of depth there, and he needs to wrestle people who are better than him, right? I mean, to become better. So that's kind of a question, especially if Gargano's not coming back. I mean, you still have, you know, Pete Dunne and Cameron Grimes, and there are some very good wrestlers there. But they really are from the old NXT, and there's not a lot there for the new NXT. I really wonder who, you know, kind of getting ahead of ourselves, like who's the next NXT champion? I don't know, you know, and if I think there's going to be a temptation, and I don't know if it's necessarily a bad idea, but to move him up relatively quickly. I mean, I don't know if by this summer we don't see him on the main roster, and that could also be kind of a mixed blessing too. I mean, if he's not that ready, he as much as everybody raves about him for good reason, he still has a ways to go, right? I mean, he's still very new and pretty green. He just has a obvious knack for it. And part of that is, again, coming up in a wrestling family, which is another thing I wanted to talk about. I mean, I think it was after the show went off the air, Rick Steiner came into the ring, and it seemed like a real nice moment. And it's just sort of puzzling that they tiptoe around this so much, in part because people like the Steiner brothers, right? I mean, they and they're also kind of this, I don't want to say forgotten act, but I think one of the real unfortunate things about the Steiner brothers is that for a whole generation, what people think about is Big Papa Pump, right? Who was a top act in a failing version of WCW. I mean, he is sort of like synonymous with the worst of WCW, not because of him, because he was a highlight and it was a character that was a lot of fun and it was over. But and I know you're a fan of the Steiners and of early 90s WCW. The Steiner brothers were the reason to watch early 90s WCW. They were absolutely revolutionary. And Rick Steiner in particular has even more of a history, I think, than Scott does, and doesn't have that Big Papa Pump era. He had his own era where he wasn't so great in WCW, you know, feuding with Chucky and all that toward the end. But do you think that, you know, more should be done to make it sort of clear? And again, they're not hiding it in some ways, because there's all kinds of allusions to it, and just the way he dresses and looks and different references and using the Steiner recliner and all that. But they're also just not sort of addressing it up front. And I think that it could be, if handled well, a meaningful part of his act. And the obvious thing to do is to have somebody beat up Rick Steiner, right? And then you've got a personal feud there. So are you puzzled as to why they're not embracing more of that lineage?
I'm not puzzled, because I think I have an idea of why they're doing it, which I'll explain, but I think it's really dumb. I think it's a huge missed opportunity. The Steiners do have this great legacy. I mean, more of the legacy is WCW, I would venture to say, than WWF. I feel like most people would agree that their best years were WCW. I mean, the stuff with Sting and Lex Luger at Super Brawl, Steve Williams and Terry Gordy. I mean, incredible stuff. They were the highlights of almost any show they were on. They were one of those rare tag teams. And this is one thing that I don't think happened as much when they were in the WWF. They were one of those rare tag teams that could easily main event. That they were considered a main event tag team act, like the Road Warriors were. I feel I put New Day in that category. These tag teams where they're bigger than just the tag team division. And so, yeah, I think it's bizarre. There have been so much hints on television. They've referred to Braun Breaker as a dog-faced gremlin. I mean, how much more obvious can you get? He's doing the Frankensteiner. He's dressed like one of the Steiner brothers. You know, he's got like that colorful singlet like what they used to wear. It's the theory I have, and I could be wrong about this, is because they're so protective of intellectual property these days and they like to change people's names and everything like that. I feel like with the competition going on with AEW, where they're rating their talent, I think there might be a fear that this is somebody that Tony Khan would definitely want. And the thing about being a Steiner and having Rick Steiner with him, or even Scott Steiner, that's something he could do anywhere he wants to do, because that's his real name, that's his family. And I don't think they want to give him something in WWE that would be so closely identified with him that he could then bring to the competition fully formed, using the same name, having the same kind of gimmick and people with him. I think there's a paranoia that he would potentially take that with him when he left. That is the only thinking that I can imagine that's keeping them from just calling him Braun Steiner and having Rick with him, or even Scott. It's the only thing I could think of as to why they're doing this.
Yeah, maybe that's it. I again, you don't want to kind of dwell on it too much because you want him to be his own man. But the Steiners, as an act, as a tag team act, I think have been out of the limelight long enough that WWE is always kind of bringing out the same old legends. You know, Sergeant Slaughter playing cards in the back with Ron Simmons or something like that, or you bring out Mike Rotundo for the 100th time. The Steiners, both guys look good. Right. I don't think it's unthinkable that they could even get in the ring. So can you imagine a 6-man match with Braun and his dad and his uncle against somebody, or even a tag match with Braun and his dad? I think there's some appeal there. I don't know, and maybe I should know, if there's some heat there with Scott in particular. I mean, I guess I've heard over the years that there are some issues. I don't know if that's what's kept him out of a Hall of Fame, but I mean, you could sort of see like where this could all go. A Hall of Fame induction of the Steiners, that Braun induct them, and you have them have a little more TV time, somehow get involved, give him some rub, and kind of reintroduce this act that I think in some ways has sort of like been forgotten a little bit by history, but was hugely influential. You know, in my formative days of becoming a wrestling fan, Steiners were one of the first acts that really attracted me to WCW in the early 1990s. And it was, I mean, today it's so kind of pedestrian, but the Frankensteiner and the tilt-a-whirl suplex and the Steiner lines and the top rope bulldog, it was revolutionary at the time. Those guys were amazing.
They were the best tag team of their era, I would say, in any company, especially in America. I mean, they were the best. They were the gold standard. And yeah, I mean, you know, Braun Breaker's been doing the Frankensteiner, and the thing that was cool about what they did was, it's one of those examples where when you look at people that were influential in the past, sometimes it's hard to understand how influential they were because of how influential they were, because then everybody started doing their stuff. And so you're going, well, why are they such a big deal? Well, because nobody was doing it, especially big guys like that. That was the thing. You would see, I mean, to do a flying head scissors, which basically a Frankensteiner is, for a guy that size, unheard of. I mean, no one, absolutely no one. The only people that ever did those kind of moves were guys that were very light on their feet, very aerial. There were the smaller guys you would see do that. But he turned it into a power move. You know, that it had never been a power move before he did it. That was the thing. And yeah, I mean, like they're on that list, like Owen Hart or Bret Hart and Kurt Hennig and people that everybody that's wrestling now watched and tried to emulate. So now it becomes the most common thing ever, but it's only because of those guys that paved the way.
Yeah, absolutely. A perfect transition into the next topic, which I wanted to talk about for some time now, and that is the second annual PWI Tag Team 50 list. It's in the February issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and it's something that I really wanted to happen for a long time. We did it for the first time last year, and the idea, kind of, getting back to what we were just talking about, is that tag team wrestling is special, and one of the things we'd always deal with in putting together the PWI 500 is how do you fairly rank a Nick Jackson, or before he was a singles wrestler, a Biggie or somebody like that, or a Mark Briscoe or a Jay Briscoe, and inevitably they'd be buried, somewhere in the hundreds or 200s, even though for what they did, they were the very best. But putting them in the same playing field as singles wrestlers, inevitably you were going to get lost in the shuffle because you're one half of an act. So the idea was to kind of give them their own ranking and recognize the kind of unique art of tag team wrestling, and like the PWI 500 and what is now the Women's 150. There's a grading period. There's criteria. With tag teams, I think the criteria is a little different. We still, pay a mind to titles won and win-loss records and things like that. But with tag teams, there's that X factor of just cohesiveness and teamwork, and I think that comes through a lot. And a fun list this year. We won't go through all of it, but I did want to go through the top 10 at least, and I'll work my way down. We don't have to spend a lot of time on 10 through 2, but we'll spend a little more time on number 1. Number 10, the Good Brothers, Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson. At this point, a real kind of veteran team, heavyweight team, had kind of a career resurgence in 2020, back on Impact, and also making some appearances on AEW, aligned with the top star there, Kenny Omega. Number 9, the Street Profits, who I think are just a fantastic act. I saw them. They essentially worked the same semi-main event at the Garden Show in a tag team match with RK Bro and some other tag teams. I think it was the Mysterios, and just carry themselves like real superstars. They didn't have the year that they had in 2020, but another terrific year, and I think really have risen as one of the better tag teams that WWE's put out in 10 plus years. Number 8, Suzuki Gun, that's El Desperado and Kanemaru over in New Japan. Number 7, Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler. Almost by default, I mean, they were the strongest women's tag team in WWE over the year, had 2 title runs, but also that was over by the summer. Number 6, MSK, Nash Carter and Wesley, who have transitioned. They're one kind of unique act in NXT that I think have made that transition to NXT 2.0 just fine, and in some ways might even be a better fit in the rebranded NXT. Number 5, ALK, which is the team of Julia and Suri over at Stardom. Suri now the new world champion over at Stardom. Number 4, the Usos, who I think if we redid this list now might be even higher. You might even be able to make the argument that they should be number 1, and they've had a fantastic last few months. Number 3, Dangerous Techners, Taichi and Zack Sabre Jr. over New Japan, held the tag team heavyweight titles over there, I think on 3 different occasions during the evaluation period. I believe just lost them over the weekend at Wrestle Kingdom. Number 2, Lucha Bros, Phoenix and Pentagon, and who are the tag champs, I believe, over in AEW now. And let's talk about the number 1 tag team. I don't think a surprise for a whole lot of people, but I'm a little surprised by how these guys still have as much heat and haters out there, and that's the Young Bucks, Nick and Matt Jackson. Do you think they were the best tag team of 2021? Is this the right pick?
I think for a couple of reasons, it is the right pick. Even if they're not among my personal favorites, I still think it's the right pick because even from a kayfabe point of view, they did have a dominant year and they were champions and they were positioned in that way. But even from a perception point of view, I mean, it's hard to argue, and this is even taking into account WWE. It's hard to disagree that they are the most high-profile tag team in the sport of pro wrestling today. It really is. They really have that aura to them that teams of the past have had, where you just know this is the tag team of the moment. I mean, yes, the other contenders for that spot are New Day and Jimmy and Jay Uso. You know, New Day, in a way, I would say, especially from a kayfabe point of view, that you can argue that they're the greatest tag team in WWE history, period. But and Usos have had the longest run, I think, of any tag team in WWE history. But again, the thing with the Young Bucks is they're kind of what I mentioned before with the Steiners is a main event tag team. They're a tag team that's a top draw. They're a tag team that transcends the tag team division, transcends tag team wrestling. I personally do not enjoy their matches. I just don't. We've talked about this before. I think it's too much chaos. Nothing makes sense. The referee's just impotent. It's a stunt show. It's just how many of my things could I get in and do? And you know what? People like it. Like I always say, I separate my tastes from what works for business. People like it. The fans eat it up, whether they're faces or heels. I think they're better as heels. So keep doing it. Keep doing it. Don't listen to 47-year-old me. That's for sure. Whether I enjoy it or not is irrelevant. They are the top tag team in the sport. And even though PWI gets slammed sometimes for being in Tony Khan's pocket, and now we've got Omega as number one in the 500 singles, and now we've got the Young Bucks number one in tag team. They've got ammunition to say that, but when you look at it objectively, it's hard to debate. It's hard to argue. Who else would you put in that spot, especially at the time that we were judging it too? I think that was the choice to be made for sure.
Yeah, you think we get a lot of hate over the AEW love now. Wait until the next issue comes out.
Oh, right.
Spoiler free.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you have the exact right take on it. And when I was thinking about, what I wanted to say about the Bucks, so much of it is couched like you couch it is, well, you don't necessarily have to like them. And I don't know that I do, but you have to get it right. I mean, that's just it. They are a real, kind of in a different sense than you usually use a word, but a controversial tag team, a controversial wrestling act in general, just because of that style. And I see it all the time on social media. An older generation, a fan probably around our age, who came up on the Attitude Era or 80s wrestling or 90s wrestling, and see what they see as these two kind of pretty boy, soft, small guys, and who do really flashy moves and don't look like legit tough guys or fighters. And I get all that, but you cannot argue that they have not been not just innovators, but have really like few other people in wrestling changed the sport, changed the art of wrestling, changed what wrestling looks like in the last 10 years. Maybe not for the better, if it's just not your cup of tea. I mean, when you think about that short list, and I always go back to that match, which was it Ospreay and Ricochet in New Japan, the one that got Vader all pissed off years ago.
Yes, that's the one.
And the Bucks are right there, right? I mean, they're all kind of from that same school, and but the Bucks have taken it further, and you can argue that there isn't an AEW, or at least AEW doesn't look the way it does without the Bucks, who are both kind of co-founders, and I think they're executive vice presidents. But their vision for wrestling really helped kind of shape what AEW is and what the modern wrestling style is. And there are a lot of people who don't like that. So I get it. So as you touched on, you don't have to like them. You've got to respect them. And beyond them just being, and this is where you really need to respect them. I mean, whether you like the style or not, what you cannot deny is that these are two guys who never phoned it in, right? I mean, you put them in a ring, on TV, on pay-per-view, what have you, and they are gonna, damn near kill themselves to entertain the fans. And you find out, months later that they had all kinds of health issues during this run that you wouldn't even necessarily know in watching them because of the quality of matches they've put on. I also think they've grown some, and the flashiness is still very much there. But I do think that they've gotten more of the fundamentals, and you do see a little more kind of long-term selling and stuff like that. And look, I mean, whether it was the match with FTR or the Lucha Bros or a bunch of other guys, I mean, these guys are constantly going out there and putting on matches that get in the conversation of greatest tag team matches in American history. So and just from kind of a kayfabe standpoint, they had a hell of a year. They won the titles, held on to them for many, many months, had lots of defenses. So I don't want to say a no-brainer because Lucha Bros had a terrific year. So there's definitely some competition. Again, I think if the evaluation period was a little bit different, the Usos would be in that conversation more than they are. But I don't think there's any. I think you don't get it, or you're being dishonest if you say, these guys suck and they don't belong in the conversation. They are the most influential tag team of a generation,
Yes.
And that was the case last year when they didn't rank number one. And even if they don't rank number one next year, that'll probably still be the case. I mean, a lot of these other teams are terrific, and on any given year, they might have a better year than the Bucks. But what the Bucks have done, I mean, you look at Ring of Honor, right? That is now folded, and you look at their high point when they were doing their best business. It's when the Bucks were on top, and they were headlining shows, and all this stuff doesn't necessarily equate into them being the best tag team in any given year. But this much is the case. We'll ask you this way. If and when the Bucks appear on a Observer Hall of Fame ballot, are you voting them in?
Yes, I would eventually vote them in. Yeah, without question. I mean, I always like to vote in the people that are from an earlier generation that I feel belong in first. But if you're asking me if I feel like they would deserve my vote, yes. Once they're no longer active, absolutely they would deserve my vote.
I think they'd get my vote today if
I don't like voting for people that are still like fully active and at the top.
You're one of those.
I just don't. I just don't, because I feel like
spoiler.
Well, like Omega getting in, I thought was ridiculous. I mean, the guy is just now in the prime of his career. You don't even, first of all, you don't even know what's going to happen for the rest of his career. But even if you're saying just based on his time now, I mean, there are a million guys that are done wrestling, not a million, but a significant number that are not in, that I feel like belong in before somebody like him would go in my mind. That's just my preference as a voter. I think because the rule that Meltzer has is it has to be, 15 years since they debuted or something, or I think whatever it is, it's got to be made longer. It's got to be a longer stretch of time. I think that's how you solve that problem.
That's a discussion worth having.
Yes.
But if they are on the ballot, and I get where you're coming from, and I think Omega is a different case. I don't know that for me he's as much a slam dunk as like an Okada, who appears on the ballot for the first time this year, or even Young Bucks. And I think one of the things you're touching on, which is legitimate, is, well, here's a good example is Junkyard Dog, who I think still hasn't made the Hall of Fame.
Sergeant Slaughter is not in.
But I think both of those are good examples. But to take JYD for a moment, right? If he appeared on the ballot when he was headlining in Mid-South, you'd think, well, absolutely, right? I mean, look, this guy's one of the biggest stars in the country right now. And then you see how not even the second half, probably the second 2/3 of his career went, and he never recaptured,
right.
that level in his career. And I think it's why he has struggled to get into that Hall of Fame, is because you can't help but think of him kind of, no pun intended, but dogging it in WWE for all those years, and then in WCW and being in really bad shape and having terrible matches. So yeah, that can happen. But I do think that there are some talents that, even if they never do anything good again, have already established themselves. I mean, if whether it's an Okada or John Cena or The Rock or Steve Austin, just those years that they were on top, their prime years, they were so special that they belong just for that time, even if they never reclaim those heights again. And I think you can make that argument for the Young Bucks.
Yes, I think you could. I think my biggest issue is when you have people that are very high profile today and on television wrestling every week, that what it also does is it takes attention away and it detracts with voters toward away from people from the past who are no longer in the public eye, who are just as deserving, in some cases, if not more deserving. And it makes them have a far less chance of getting votes. And that's another problem I have with doing that. It's like, if somebody is 30, 35 years old, who are they going to vote for, the Young Bucks or Mr. Wrestling 2? You know what I mean? But I feel like both of those acts deserve to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how it's done, but I do think Dave Meltzer has said that they sort of adjust for that. Okay. That they have enough representation in all the categories, because every year that ballot comes and there are entire categories where I won't vote for anybody because I feel it's unfair for me to pick because I don't know it well enough, right? But I think that they have enough people among the folks who are voting to adjust for all that. And I think Meltzer would say at the end of the day, if whether it's Sergeant Slaughter or JYD, if they're supposed to get in, they'd get in or will get in. But I think both those cases, and this is a whole other show to talk about, but yes. There's obviously stuff weighed against them as well, right? I mean, the consistency wasn't always there with both. The highs were high, but the lows were pretty low as well. And in both those cases, if you made a timeline of their careers, and they both had very long careers, the parts where they really shined bright might not take up that much of the timeline. And that's certainly the case with Slaughter as well, who spent a lot of years not exactly setting the world on fire.
Yes.
But burned super hot when he did.
Right. And he became, in that moment that he became one of those transcendent names that becomes bigger than wrestling, and where everybody knew who he was. And I think people of a certain age to this day still know that name. Even if they never watch wrestling, they know that name. Yeah. I mean, there's the famous story of Richard Nixon marking out for him on an airplane once. He likes to tell that story because he was sitting next to him and he was just blown away by that. And I think even for that window of time, like same thing like we're talking about for the Young Bucks, the height that he attained, even in that shorter amount of time, I think makes him worthy in my eyes. But again, this has nothing to do with the Tag Team 50.
Yeah, not to drag it out even further, but I think you're touching on something that is maybe a blind spot in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is and it's that kind of intangible, right? And I totally know what you're talking about with Sergeant Slaughter is like, and that's not going to show up in match quality or drawing.
You know what it is? It's the intangible of saying, like, if you say to somebody, yes, there's a Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame over here, and Sergeant Slaughter is not in it, and having that person's jaw hit the floor. You know what I mean? That is the intangible of saying, how in the world, and you can't measure that, but saying, how in the world do you have a Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and Sergeant Slaughter can't get enough votes to go in? It's bizarre.
The one for me that fits that bill, and this might lead to another argument between you and I, is the Ultimate Warrior. And I think
I would agree with you on that. I would agree with you on that. Yes.
Yeah. And I get every everything that is against him. His matches were terrible. Didn't necessarily have the longest run at the top, but I think that same question that you just brought up, pose it to sort of like the casual fan or the non-fan. Can you believe that there's a Wrestling Hall of Fame and the Ultimate Warrior is not on it? And I'll go one step further. Ask a lot of wrestlers that, and not just the ones you'd think, but ask Bryan Danielson that, ask Frankie Kazarian that. Those two guys come to mind that I happen to know are Ultimate Warrior fans.
Is the Warrior not in? Is he not in the Observer?
He's not in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. I know that because I vote for him every year. And
I thought he was.
And honestly, I don't think he'll ever get it. I mean, and with him, different than some other guys. I mean, there's nothing. Obviously, him having passed away, going on 8 years ago, there's obviously nothing that he can do. Now, other guys, you could sort of like change your case, like you can win over some hearts and minds. I thought that we're way off here, but those documentaries last year, the Vice one and the WWE one, I actually thought helped make the case for him, even though there were so many people disparaging him, and for good reason. I think it was also a reminder of what was so special about him. And again, and I have all respect in the world for Dave Meltzer, but it's going to be lost on him. I mean, I think you just see, a guy was on steroids and he couldn't throw a clothesline worth a damn, and was difficult to work with, and nobody liked him, and he, was potentially homophobic, racist, every bad thing that you could say about the Ultimate Warrior, which I totally get. I still think he was extra special and should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's the intangible stuff that you can't measure, because you just can't treat pro wrestling the same way as you do, like, say, baseball or football or boxing, because it's not a pure sport like that. It is show business. It is in some ways more like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where it's like you look at it, an act, and you throw numbers out the window and you just go like, oh my God! For God's sake, they have to be in there. I mean, it's I don't know, it's the Beatles. Like, I don't care that they were only together for 8 years. Like, they have to be. How could they not be?
I just had this conversation on New Year's with my older brother, who's like, a Kiss fan, an AC/DC fan. He's very kind of like has a narrow view of rock music, and Nirvana came up, and he didn't think Nirvana should be in the
another great example.
I'm like, what? And they were around for just a few years, then the guy blew himself away, and it's like Nirvana is one of the but I get that view of it, like, right, the longevity's not there. Never had I believe, well, maybe they did, but never had a number one single or anything like that. But they're Nirvana, right? I mean, how
and wrestling is more like that than sports are. It's more like you have to include that intangible. You have to include star power and aura and like the perception, because it's not just a numbers game. Or how many RBIs, how many home runs, how many strike. It's not. It's just not like that.
The tricky thing is that you would think that star power aura would translate to box office, right? And they do look at box office, but it's not always that cut and dry, right?
Right. What if somebody's a mid-carder? There's plenty of mid-carders that belong.
And there's all kinds of other issues working against you sometimes in being part of a, there are wrestlers who can lay claim to having headlined for these shows that had huge gates and huge pay-per-view buys that realistically weren't the level of stars as an Ultimate Warrior or Sergeant Slaughter or a Junkyard Dog. So there are other factors that you have to. So yeah, some of it is just aura and influence and that in all these cases, I think these are wrestlers who have a lot of it. So yeah. Anyhow, so much for keeping this concise and short, but I think it's a worthwhile conversation. Maybe when they and I expect probably in the next few weeks when they come out with a class, we could spend some time talking about the latest inductees.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's always one of my favorite topics to discuss, and who I voted for and why and all that. And yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate it. A good conversation as always. Quickly, why don't you tell folks about pre-ordering your book and everything else that you've got going on?
Sure. So a couple of quick things. My biography of the original Sheik, called Blood and Fire, It's officially out on April 12th, but Amazon and other places like BarnesandNoble.com and stuff, they're all taking pre-orders now, so you can easily go and pre-order. And the people who pre-order get priority when the book is finally published. They'll get priority from Amazon. They'll be getting them first. And there's a Kindle version that's going to come out, so if if that's your preference, you can do that as well. Also, the other thing I want to mention is my own podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, which we are just ready to go. I'm just waiting for the green light. It's been a couple of weeks now, but it should be just about set to go. It's an old school wrestling podcast that I'm going to be doing with the Arcadian Vanguard Network. And my first guest is Stu Sachs, the former publisher of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. So once it is posted and available, I'll let people know, but the website is going to be suawpod.com. It's not up yet, but it's going to be very soon. Who knows? Maybe by the time this goes up, maybe it will be posted. I'm waiting with bated breath like everybody else, but it's called Shut Up and Wrestle. So you will be hearing about it shortly.
Yeah, it sounds like an absolute must listen. I mean, especially for folks like you and me who and a lot of listeners, I imagine, who are of a certain age, a certain generation, and nostalgic types. This sounds very much right up my alley. So I definitely look forward to giving it a listen. Brian, thank you so much. We'll be back soon. Right now, let's hear Righteous Reg's hot seat interview with the former WWE champion, Big E.
E, thank you for joining me today. This is an honor, a privilege, all the great things I could ever imagine.
No, I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. Thank you.
So I've been watching WWE for 30 years. I'm a black man. This year I've interviewed 2 black WWE champions, and I just can't even believe that I can say that out loud. 1, and 2, I can't believe that happened. That's amazing. So first of all, how does it feel being the 4th ever black WWE champion? Something that just doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, no, I really love getting to this moment where we're at in WWE, and I think just in wrestling in general. And you look around, and there are just so many really dope black performers. And what I love is that so many of us are like one-of-ones and authentic and feel like ourselves. And I love that we're getting into this point where we're not all like forced into a certain box or a certain stereotype. So yeah, more than anything, I'm just really proud of the state of like black wrestling. I kind of was talking about this earlier, and I feel like we have a lot of fans who felt like a lot of black fans, especially, who loved wrestling and have for a long time, but didn't necessarily see themselves or their culture reflected on, wrestling TV. And I love that we're getting to a point. I'm such a massive Bianca fan, and I love when I see her. She's such an incredible human being, but such an incredible performer as well. And is so genuine, authentic, and just belongs where she's at. And, so I just love the state of black wrestling right now, because I think there's just so many dope performers that, that look like me.
Yeah, that is awesome. And that's true, because Bianca's she's like one of the most authentic wrestlers in all of wrestling. When you see her do a promo, you're just like, this feels real. This feels like something she would say, and this feels like how she would act. And that's great. And that's also how I feel about you, which is super dope. How does it feel, like before you became WWE champion, there's a lot of talk about your character, how you act, and that you need to get more serious. You need to put on some different colors. You need to wear black, like all these crazy things, saying that in order to get to the next level, you had to change your whole deal. How does it feel getting to that next level and you didn't change any of that?
Yeah, man, my thing was, I just feel like as a performer, I've been with WWE for 12 years, almost 9 years in the main roster. If I don't have an internal barometer by now, then I probably don't belong here. And I feel like I have made some, and I've always tried to make some adjustments. I'm not wearing, rainbow colors now. I'm not wearing a unicorn horn on my head, because there are certain times where I felt like, I wanted this run to still feel like me, but I wanted it to feel purposeful. Like I'm here. As soon as, we did the promo last year with Kofi kind of giving me his blessing to do single stuff, I just wanted that to feel like, okay, I'm still me, but there's an extra level of determination. Like I'm not just here to sit backstage and goof around. So, I have made some adjustments, but I still, like you said, at the core, I still feel like I'm me, which has made getting to the top of this industry feel even more rewarding because I just felt very strongly like I don't want to have to fit into a certain box. I don't want to feel like I have to shave off my edges to fit a certain box of what people want me to be. Like I didn't want to lose any sense of me. And, you know, we have so many people, and this is not a shot at anyone, but in wrestling, you have a ton of characters who wear black, who are brooding, who are serious. And I didn't want to be someone that people had already seen before. You know, I didn't want to try to be another Brock or Mark Henry or John Cena, whoever it is. I just wanted to be me. And that's what to me has also made this extra rewarding is I feel like I got to do it my way.
Right. That's amazing. And then, I think the best thing about this whole thing is a lot of times when discussing the New Day, people, in order for one to succeed, the only way for that person to succeed is he has to get away from the New Day. Anytime someone's like, oh yeah, we want to see, when they were talking about you, we want to see Ego to the top. The only way he's going to make it though is if he leaves Kofi, if he leaves Woods, or if they break up, if they split up. How important was it for you to get to the top with your guys there? Because for me, when Kofi won the championships, it made it even more special that you and Woods were there. They want so hard for like the champion to be like this loner, Lone Star, James Dean, it's just me type dude. But when you get there with your friends, it feels so much better when it's like a gang, you know what I mean? So how important was it that when you won the championship, your boys are right there with you?
Massively important. So important. We all got to, I don't get to this point without the New Day. Without Kofi and Woods, I don't get the opportunity to feel more free as a character, even just the practice of getting out there to cut promos on a weekly basis, stuff that I wasn't doing before. So I will always give those dudes massive credit because I still feel very much like whatever I accomplish is under the New Day banner. Like this title win, being WWE title, this adds to our resume. This adds to, so everything we do, even as solo, is about that. It's adding to our resume as the New Day. I love those guys, and we talk about it ad nauseum. People are probably sick of it, but there's a real brotherhood. There's a real, we just genuinely root for each other. I'm free to talk about it because I have such a, we just have a real love for each other, and we want to see each other succeed. And I just genuinely love that I can come to the back after I did something cool, and those guys, like, man, seeing like Wood shedding tears or Kofi just beaming, man, that's the best thing. Getting to the top is great, but like you said, being able to do it with your friends there's nothing like it. And I feel like we've all elevated each other. It's exactly what you would want it's like best case scenario out of a faction where everyone is better off because of the faction. We don't have one person emerge as a leader and push down the others. We always, from the very start, we wanted to make it clear there was no leader. There was no person who was going to try to drag the others down to be the star. And I think that selflessness has been the key to our success.
Definitely, most definitely. You guys have all elevated each other, and the journey feels, like I said, more important because you guys are there. Like, Woods just won the King of the Ring tournament, and it all feels even more important because the whole time that he's been wanting to have this moment, you two have been there by his side. And so you guys, this has been the New Day's year, man. I just want to say, first of all, congrats, because you guys have been just having the best time, and you just put you guys just did it your way. You put your nose to the ground and you just went for it. It's really amazing to see every new step that you guys get to take. It's great.
Well, thank you, man. I'm just very, very proud of us.
Yeah. So you won the WWE championship. To get there, you were the Money in the Bank winner. How was it carrying around the Money in the Bank? You didn't have to carry it around for too long, but what was life like with the briefcase?
It was a massive honor. It was very, very cool. I will say my only, and this is a small nitpicky thing that I should never complain about, but that thing is not the best to travel with as far as like going in and out of airport. Because if it was a little bit bigger, I could just make it, okay, this is my carry-on. I can put my gear in it and whatnot. But so it's a little too small for that. But it's also a little too big.
The briefcase being your carry-on is super funny for me.
It's pretty ridiculous. But So that's kind of the workers thing. We're all obviously very, very happy with it. But anyone who's had the Money in the Bank, especially for a while, we all kind of end up talking and we're all like, hey, it's really a pain. And like, how do you travel with this thing? So there's a little nice like fraternity and sorority of us Money in the Bank holders who have to figure out how to travel with it. But I think the cool thing was it felt like a bit of a teaser of letting people know, like, all right, this is something pretty cool for me is coming. But I mean, the thing is, you also never know. We also saw Otis recently lose hands. We've seen people in the past, Corbin lose the cash in as well. So you never really truly know. And I guess that was always an option. If I'm being honest, I didn't think that was going to happen for me because I thought, people will be pretty upset. This is a bad business move to have me get this briefcase and then not cash in. So yeah, it was cool that, it felt like the next step up for me as a guy who'd been around for a while. Of course, I had the IC title a couple times, but it's kind of crazy to be 12 years into your time with WWE, 9 years on the main roster and like still be hitting like new highs. This is all like brand new territory. And it's exciting for me now because all these matchups, even though I've wrestled Drew before, but when I wrestled Drew, I think that the last time I had a singles match with him, I think he was still in 3MB. And I think this was before the New Day. So like that feels brand new. Even the singles match with Seth, I've wrestled Seth before. We've been wrestling on the house shows too. But as far as a singles match on TV, I want to say that I could be wrong. But the last one I remember is we had a main event match, again, pre-New Day. So now I love the fact I had never wrestled Bobby Lashley before in a singles until I beat him for the title. And then we had our matches after that. So that's what I love is, and I think that's the beautiful part with elevating someone like me who's been around and established, but never really in the main event scene like this is now you have all these brand new possibilities for matches. And I think that's what our business needs. We need more fresh matchups. We need more like rising stars. And yeah, so it's definitely an exciting time for me because there's so many new possibilities.
Right. Going back to the Money in the Bank briefcase a little bit before, a thing that's kind of been going on with the briefcase is like, I guess people were, how it's executed, I guess you could say, like they say, oh, well, the babyface doesn't usually work for the babyface because he has to get the one up on the heel or like the way that they wouldn't, a babyface would call out the guy before the match instead of just being like, blah, blah, blah. But you kind of did go about that way because you said, you tweeted, I'm coming to Raw with this briefcase and it's going down. Do you feel like you got a chance to show that a babyface can hold it and it doesn't have to be a bust?
Yeah. Well, I think too, and I completely get where it comes from. I think we have certain tropes in wrestling. I think that's similarly why people want the New Day to break up is because you're just always accustomed to, we've seen the Shield and we see all these factions. And it's always about, who's going to, and I get it, it's interesting to see who's going to be the one to turn.
It's the Rockers, Shawn Michaels.
Right. And that's what people are used to. And it's worked in the past. I'm not saying it doesn't work. It definitely works. But, I think it also helped the fact I didn't have the briefcase for 9 months to a year or however long. So, it wasn't, I completely get where the sentiment comes from, but I think we could tell stories in a bit of a different way. And I think for me, it worked. I don't think I ever felt like a heel or I felt dickish because of the way I handled things. I think it obviously helped too. Like you said, there's just something to saying like, hey, Bobby, I know you have this title match with Randy, but tonight I am assuring you, I promise you I'm coming for your title. I'm going to cash in. So I feel like doing it that way worked. And also, man, the crowd and people were just so behind me. It felt like such a feel good moment, at least for me, that I think it would have erased any kind of feeling that, I kind of snuck up on the heel or the current champion when he was down. So I feel like a lot of that went out of the window just because, the result of it was such a positive. Right.
The crowd was super hot. How has it been going from SmackDown to Raw? Because that was kind of like when you made the transition. Because after that, you've been on Raw every week since then. How's it been going from being a SmackDown guy to being a Raw guy and, immediately getting that great reception?
Yeah, everything about it is different now because I am now the guy who, for the most part, opens Seg 1s. And I'm now the guy who so opening and closing. So I'm not just moving over to Raw, But now I'm in this very different position where like, hey, you're the guy. So, a lot of life has changed in ways that, I knew things were going to change. I knew there would be some more added responsibilities and whatnot, but I've also just really had a blast with it. It's been a lot of fun. And I guess one of the biggest differences for me now is navigating, before, especially those first few weeks on Raw, I'm now like, hey, here are your 6 to 8 segments, where, hey, I had 2 matches with Bobby, that culminated. The second match was a steel cage match. And so now instead of, hey, when I was on Smackdown with the briefcase, a lot of times it was just, here's your 10-second teaser backstage with Paul Heyman, where you just wave the briefcase in his face and that's about it. Now there's just a lot more of the show is on me. And I've enjoyed that. It's definitely more work, but it's been fulfilling and fun work. And I feel like it's been an enjoyable start. Like, looking back on not that there's much to look back on, but the last 6 weeks or so, I feel like we've done a lot already. We've had what to many is a possible dream match in this triple threat with Roman and Bobby. We had the Bloodline versus New Day. I've had a steel cage match. I've had a title defense, a match that I was really happy with Drew McIntyre, in Riyadh. So I feel like it hasn't really been that much time, but I feel like already it's gotten off to a great start. Not to mention the fact that I've been able to do some bucket list things like getting to do Big Noon Kickoff in Iowa City to watch Iowa beat Penn State, hopping on a jet to then go to Fury Wilder to be a part of that. So man, it's kind of wild how much of my life has changed just in these last, couple months.
Going on a date with Demetria Obavor. I mean, I wasn't supposed to say that part, I think.
We just went to the fight, sat next to each other. That's all.
Legendary top guy. No one can touch him. He's been killing. Oh my God.
Well, yes.
I think it's, when we mention the rise of Biggie, it's always great to mention Wale. How did the theme song with Wale come about? Because I think that was a big part of like this, like Big E's ready. He got the new theme. It's lit. Like, how did the thing with Wale happen?
Yeah, so eventually they just came to me, and this was about a year ago. And the talk was essentially like, hey, we want to do a solo theme for you. And, initially I was just thinking, okay, let's get something, like maybe we just remix the current theme, the New Day theme that people are familiar with. So it still has connections to that. But, the thing that I loved is, in my mind, if it's, hey, new theme, whatever we're doing musically, my first thought is Wale. Reach out to Wale. Can Wale do it? Is he free?
Right.
And before I even had the chance to, I reached out to Neil Lowy, who, runs the music stuff as far as connecting, musicians with WWE and with wrestlers. And the first thing I reached out to was Neil. And I think Neil probably texted me before I even did. And he said, hey, you want to get Wale? And I said, you read my mind. You already know. So that was the nice part, is to have some input on it, and then to be able to go back and forth on the beat a little bit. And they asked me kind of my input, and just being able to talk to Wale. And and he's the man. And he would come to me and say, hey, like, kind of ask me for ideas. I'm like, man, you're Wale. You know me. You know the product. Whatever you put down, I'm going to be happy with. So, right. I am so thankful for this brother, because he supported me in ways that even beyond wrestling, man, and I love the fact, man, like, I'm not into having celebrity friends for the sake of celebrity. We have just such genuine conversations. He's such a hilarious dude. Like, beyond music and wrestling, like, that's my friend. That's my brother. And, it's dope to be able to go along this ride with him. Also, and the fact that this man dropped, I love Faloran too. I'm a big hip hop head, but I also like, he to me is such an incredible rapper. Just dropped an incredible album. To me, album of the year, but I'll let people figure that out themselves. But it's been, I love being able to do this journey with people that I love and that I respect and that are friends. So being able to do the journey with Kofi and Woods and have Wale, every time I come out, it's Wale's voice is beautiful.
Wale's almost the fourth member of the New Day, pretty much. That's like been a thing for a while.
Legit. Like, at this point, he honestly really is.
So dope. That just like sounds wild. I couldn't imagine like back in 1998 watching WWE that like one of the best rappers in the world would like be down with the group that's in the company and do the theme for him. I mean, people probably say ICP, but like, yo, what are y'all talking about? Y'all talking, y'all talking crazy out here.
Right, exactly.
Oh man. So, what's been your favorite live crowd since you guys have been back on the road?
Oh, man, let me think. Well, I don't know. I can't say anything. It's gotta be Boston, right? It's gotta be Boston. That response
just because
in
that was
Boston
the
when I
one.
won the title. Yeah, they were incredible. So yeah, I mean, you can't top that moment. Man, we've had some good ones. We've had some really good ones. Even on the live event, scale, like we were in El Paso and Rio Rancho recently and they were incredible. So even like being able to do some of these live events and get back to some feeling of like normalcy of like, hey, this is what we do. We do our TVs, but hey, we also hit these towns and we go to towns like El Paso and do these live events. So those towns were great too. But if forced to pick one since we've been back, man, Boston showed me so much love that'll always be a memory that, you know, I'll be on my deathbed. I'll be an old man and I'll fondly remember Boston.
Right. That's dope, man. It's been a run. What, you know, you're the WWE champion. It's been, like you said, it's been a crazy ride this last 6 weeks. You've been on Raw, you've been on Smackdown, you've been to Saudi Arabia, you've been all over the world. Have you taken time just to sit back and be like, I did this? Cause it's been a world, like, as soon as they put the belt on you, you were just like on flights, on TV, on football, on baseball, on basketball, on boxing, like all these things. I'm like, yo, Biggie is out here. Have you taken the time to just like, oh, I'm the champ. We out here.
You know what? It's like you said, man, it's been even then, like I'm in New York right now because I'm doing media. I'm about to go home. And even when I go home, I have more work to do. So I don't know if there's really an I made it moment, but I will say, you know, I have had some moments to reflect, mostly just kind of really about my life in general. And I think back to times where I really struggled to find my place in the world and just not seeing much value in myself when I was younger and just wondering what my life would turn out to be. And I look back and I just, you know, I feel like I have these moments sometimes where I connect with my inner child or I think back to like my 14-year-old self and I'm damn proud of me. And that's a beautiful feeling because I'm not a person who has been brimming with self-confidence all my life. You know, oftentimes I was just very self-deprecating, very self-loathing, but I just gotten to this really great point in my life. It feels like so many great things are happening in my life, even beyond wrestling and WWE and winning this championship. I'm just really proud of myself. And it feels good to find self-love and to have overcome so many things and, just to get to this point of being proud of the man I am and who I'm becoming and the path I'm on. And there's so many things that I want to do, selfishly and to help others. And so, yeah, it's really just been taking stock of my life in general. And I'm happy, man. I'm just generally happy just with my life, with where I am, with WWE, with my personal life, with my relationships. And it's really just a point I never thought I'd get to. And not that I never thought I'd be WWE champion or have all these accolades, but really this moment where I'm settled with myself, where I find real peace with myself, where I feel like I'm on my path. And that's something that I'm wildly grateful for.
That's amazing. Oh, just hearing that is amazing because, you know, like as a wrestling fan, a lot of this is new. We talk about like black wrestling, black wrestlers, black wrestling, all this stuff. I've been watching for 30 years. So a lot of this is new. There's only been 4 of these guys. So like, I just feel so proud all the time. I was at WrestleMania and watching Bianca and Sasha was like, I can't even believe that this is happening. And there's been so many moments like that this year. You've been a part of a lot of them. The New Day's been a part of so many of them throughout these years that I'm just like so happy that you guys are doing this. And I'm so blessed to be a black wrestling fan. Finally, it's taken a long time.
Yes.
It's taken so long, man. Jeez Louise.
Yeah.
So just thank you for being yourself. I get upset when they tell you to change, when they tell you, I'm like, why? That makes it even better that he's himself. Like people don't feel like in order to get to a certain thing, you have to be somebody else. You don't, man. You could get to where you were being the person that you are. And that's like inspiring that the New Day more than any group just defines that, you know? So thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. A couple more. Do you have any dream matches? Is that Goldberg match still on there? Would you like to lock horns with Brock Lesnar one day? Like, what's about to happen here? You got the crown now. They coming for you.
Yeah, man, it's wild because now I feel like there are a lot of dream matches that I thought, all right, I'd never really get that are now possibilities, which is pretty cool. The Goldberg match is obviously one that's, it's kind of ridiculous, but it's still a possibility. So, that's an option, maybe. I think about even,
it seems closer than ever now, I'd say.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I would say, even though he's a babyface, I'm a babyface too. I would say probably the match with Edge, is another one, that I think just because, Edge, see him come back and put on the kind of performances he's put on, man, I'm just so impressed. And he's such an incredible dude. And like that's one that would be high up for me. But I also think there's all these dream matches that, I think the Roman match is a match that's massive, but that's not a Mania match. That's a Survivor Series match coming right around the corner. I'm excited about that as well. And even like, I would probably say like the Seth match, the Roman match, but these matches are both happening in the next, couple months. So I don't know what else is out there. It's something I haven't really thought too much about, but yeah, I don't know. You know what? I kind of wish we hadn't done it at all yet, but I feel like we didn't really get a real conclusion to the Bloodline versus, the New Day. So that's definitely one that I would love to. That would be a dope Mania match, especially if it was for all the titles. Like, if they had tag titles and world titles on the line, something like that, I think would be really fun.
All right, a couple more because I know you got to get out of here. What would you like your legacy as the WWE champion to be, and kind of tying it in? Or is there still room for like a New Day tag title run? Is that door closed, or is it like, everything is still open up in the air possibility? So legacy and New Day's future.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know what? We always started the group. Our intention as a group was really to be a faction that had single stories. And, we just operated as this weird 3-man tag team for years. And now it wasn't until Kofi Mania where we just really started to tap into the original idea of what we wanted to be. I'm not saying that, like, for me, I don't know if, I don't know if, I'm not saying being a part of another tag team title run would be a backward step, but, I'd also just love to see, Woods as King of the Ring, me as WWE champion. Imagine like Kofi versus Roman, man, and with the right build. I'd like to continue to see us just do our own thing, but come together, still be a group. But I just feel like there's so much untapped potential with us really pursuing singles titles, but still coming together for 6 man when the time is right. So I love the idea of us just being this group of multiples where, there's a tag team between me and Woods maybe, and then Kofi's doing something. I love the fact that we can combine and separate, and we can come and go as we please. And, it's funny too to think about all of our original ideas. Like originally we wanted to add members. Like Alicia Fox was someone we considered. Even Damian Sandow was again, we didn't reach out to any of these people. This is, things we thought about. But now
Byron Saxton.
Honestly, the inception of the group was because of a group that we started in FCW with Saxton and Abraham Washington. We just we picked pieces of that, and then we just kind of stole from that original idea. So yeah, I'm so proud of Woods. So I'd love to see him continue his run as King of the Ring. I know he has a gang of ideas that are all going to be fun. I'd love to see Kofi is still a legend. He's still a former world champion. I'd love to see Kofi get the opportunities he deserves too. And that's the nice thing on Smackdown now is, whether it's an IC title run, whether it's another world title run, like Kofi has options too. So, I don't exactly know what I want for all 3 of us, but I feel like you said, it's been a really good year for us as a trio, and I want to just keep that moving.
Amazing. Well, like I said, I appreciate it. It's been 30 years. I created this list 500 best black wrestlers in the world. Next year, you're definitely going to be top 2 because you won the WWE Championship. And I appreciate everything that you've done this year. Appreciate the New Day. Their legacy is amazing. One of the greatest WWE tag teams of all time. You're going to go down in history as one of the best ever, like a homegrown WWE talent that did it, reached the pinnacle. It's been an amazing year. Thank you for this conversation. Thanks for everything. It's been great. I appreciate you, E.
I appreciate you. Thanks for having me. And I didn't know it was your list either. That list was dope. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, man.